Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is River Nakamura and I am 26 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 8 months. This happened during the fall of 2024, when the missing person case of Marlo Chen turned into something that still haunts me. I was still new to the job, only 8 months in, when everything went wrong. The academy had taught me procedures, protocols, search patterns, but nothing about the kind of predator that walks on 2 legs and thinks like you do. Only better. The call came in on a Tuesday evening, just as the autumn darkness was swallowing the last traces of daylight at 5:30 p.m. Marlo Chen, a 23-year-old graduate student from the University of Washington, had failed to check in after 3 days of solo research on old-growth forest ecosystems along the Ho River Trail. Her advisor had expected her back Monday afternoon. Now it was Tuesday, and no one had heard from her. I remember the metallic taste of anxiety flooding my mouth as I suited up in the ranger station. This was my first real missing person case, and the weight of responsibility felt like a stone in my chest. Supervisor Martinez briefed me quickly. Standard grid search, follow protocol, radio check-ins every 30 minutes. Marlo was experienced, he said, but the Olympic wilderness didn't forgive mistakes, even from experienced hikers. Nakamura, Martinez called as I headed for the door. You've got this. Trust your training. I nodded, but my hands were already trembling as I checked my gear. GPS unit, emergency radio, medical kit, flashlight, backup batteries, emergency flares. Everything felt foreign in my fingers, despite months of practice. The academy taught you procedures, but they never mentioned how the darkness between the trees could feel alive, watching. The Ho River Trail wound through some of the most pristine temperate rainforest in North America. Ancient Sitka spruces and western hemlocks created a cathedral of shadows, their moss-draped branches filtering what little moonlight managed to penetrate the canopy. The air smelled of decomposition and wet earth, that rich, fertile scent of things living and dying in the endless cycle of the forest. My radio crackled to life as I reached the trailhead. Ranger 247, this is base. Radio check. Base, this is Ranger 247. Signal clear. Beginning search grid Alpha 7. ETA to Chen's last known position, 45 minutes. Copy that, 247. Maintain regular contact. The trail felt different at night. During my daytime patrols, it had seemed welcoming, almost magical with its cathedral lighting and carpet of moss. But darkness transformed it into something else entirely. Every crack of a branch made me jump. The steady drip of condensation from the canopy created an irregular percussion that masked other sounds. My flashlight beam seemed pathetically small against the overwhelming blackness. I'd studied Marlo's research proposal before heading out. She was documenting the relationship between old-growth nurse logs and mycorrhizal networks, the underground fungal connections that linked forest trees in vast, invisible webs of communication. Smart kid, passionate about her work. The kind of person who might lose track of time when she discovered something fascinating. That thought gave me hope as I hiked deeper into the forest. Maybe she'd just gotten caught up in her research, set up an impromptu camp, lost track of the days. It happened. The wilderness had a way of making time feel fluid, irrelevant. 40 minutes in, I found her base camp. The orange 2-person tent was perfectly intact, guy lines tight, rainfly properly secured. No signs of animal interference or weather damage, but something felt wrong. The camp was too neat, too organized. Her research equipment was laid out with military precision. Sample containers in perfect rows, notebooks stacked and weighted down with stones, even her camp stove cleaned and properly stored. I'd seen Marlo's previous campsites during routine patrols. She was a careful researcher, but she lived like most graduate students. Organized chaos, gear scattered around as she worked. This looked like someone had straightened up after her. Base, this is 247. Located Chen's base camp. Coordinates I rattled off the GPS numbers. Camp appears undisturbed, but subject is not present. Beginning expanded search of immediate area. Copy, 247. Any signs of her recent presence? I swept my flashlight around the campsite again, looking for clues. That's when I noticed the research journal, opened to a page dated 3 days ago. Her handwriting was neat, precise. Day 3. Interesting mycorrhizal density readings 200 meters northwest of camp. Large nurse log approximately 400 years old showing unusual fungal activity. We'll investigate further tomorrow. Tomorrow. She'd been planning to continue her research. Whatever happened to her, it wasn't planned. Base. Found her research journal. Last entry indicates she planned to investigate a site northwest of camp. I'm following her trail. Negative 247. Hold position until backup arrives. ETA 20 minutes. My heart sank. 20 minutes of standing around while Marlowe might be injured, hypothermic, dying somewhere in the darkness. But protocols existed for good reasons. I was new, inexperienced. The smart move was to wait. Copy base, holding position. But as I stood there in the circle of my flashlight, surrounded by the breathing darkness of the forest, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice, distant and muffled, calling for help. Help me. Please. Someone help me. It was coming from the northwest, the same direction Marlowe had planned to investigate. A woman's voice, weak but definitely audible. Base, this is 247. I'm hearing calls for help from the northwest quadrant, approximately 200 meters from camp, requesting permission to investigate. Static answered me. I tried again. Base, do you copy? I need immediate guidance. More static. I checked my radio. Power was good. Antenna was fine. Sometimes the dense forest interfered with transmissions, but I'd had clear contact just minutes before. The voice came again, weaker this time. Help. Please. I'm hurt. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to help. This was why I'd become a ranger, to protect people, to save lives. But my training also said to wait for backup, to follow procedures, to not become another casualty. I compromised. I'd move toward the voice, but stay in radio contact. Retreat if anything felt wrong. Base, this is 247. Moving to assist injured party, maintaining radio contact. Silence. I shouldered my pack and headed northwest, following what looked like a faint game trail through the underbrush. The voice had stopped, but I'd marked the direction. My flashlight beam danced across moss-covered logs and fern fronds, creating a constantly shifting world of light and shadow. The forest felt different as I moved deeper. The air grew colder, and that rich earth scent was replaced by something else, something organic but wrong. Like meat left too long in the heat. I'd gone maybe 50 meters when I found the first sign. A piece of orange fabric, the same color as Marlowe's tent, caught on a devil's club thorn, but it was too high, nearly 6 feet off the ground. How had it gotten there? I photographed it with my camera, marked the GPS coordinates, and continued following the trail. The smell was getting stronger. Another 20 meters and I found her boot. It was sitting upright on a fallen log, laces tied as if someone had carefully placed it there. A size 7 hiking boot, well worn, with the same brand I'd seen in her tent. But again, the placement was wrong. Why would someone remove their boot and set it so deliberately on a log? My hands were shaking now as I called in the discovery. Base, this is 247. Found what appears to be missing person's hiking boot. Something's not right here. The placement is unnatural. Static again. Complete radio silence. I tried switching channels, checking my equipment. Everything looked functional, but I couldn't reach anyone. The forest pressed in around me, suddenly feeling less like a cathedral and more like a trap. That's when I heard the voice again, but this time it was different. River Nakamura. My blood turned to ice. The voice knew my name. River. Help me. Please. It was coming from ahead, deeper in the forest, but now I could tell something was wrong with it. The timber was off, the cadence too perfect. It sounded like someone trying to imitate a woman's voice. I drew my service weapon, a decision that felt both necessary and completely inadequate. Whatever was out there knew who I was, knew I was coming. This wasn't a rescue anymore. This was a hunt. I keyed my radio again, whispering now. Mayday, Mayday, this is Ranger 247. I have a code gray situation. Requesting immediate backup at my coordinates. I am being stalked by an unknown subject. Nothing but static. The voice came a third time, and now I was certain it wasn't Marlowe. River, don't be afraid. I just want to talk. It was a man's voice, not even trying to disguise itself anymore. Deep, confident, with the trace of an accent I couldn't place. He sounded amused. I had two choices: retreat to Marlowe's camp and wait for backup that might never come, or continue forward and try to find her before this predator, because that's what he was, I was certain now. Decided he was done playing games. The Ranger manual said retreat. My conscience said advance. I continued forward, weapon drawn, every sense hyper alert. The smell of decomposition was overwhelming now, and I realized it wasn't natural forest decay. It was something else, something that had once been alive. The trail led to a small clearing dominated by an enormous fallen cedar, easily 4 feet in diameter and 100 feet long. Nurse logs like this one were common in old-growth forests, providing nutrients and growing space for new generations of trees. But this one had been modified. Someone had carved symbols into the bark, not random scratches, but deliberate markings that looked almost like tallies. Dozens of them, arranged in groups of 5. My flashlight beam swept the length of the log, and that's when I saw them. Personal items, scattered along the nurse log like decorations on a twisted Christmas tree. A red bandana tied to a broken branch, a hiking sock draped over a protruding root, a water bottle dented and empty, a woman's watch still ticking, and at the far end, barely visible in my flashlight's reach, something that made my legs nearly give out. Marlowe Chen, alive but bound to the log with climbing rope, duct tape across her mouth, eyes wide with terror above the tape. She saw my light and began struggling frantically, making muffled sounds behind the tape. I ran toward her, forgetting caution, forgetting procedures, thinking only of getting her free. That's when I heard the laughter. Low, appreciative chuckling from the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. Very good, Ranger Nakamura. Right on schedule. I spun toward the voice, weapon raised, but saw nothing beyond the wall of black between the trees. Who are you? I shouted, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Show yourself. Oh, we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about your performance so far. Very professional. You followed protocol right up until you heard the damsel in distress. Then emotion overruled training, just like I knew it would. The voice was coming from different directions now, moving through the forest with impossible silence. This wasn't some random psychopath. This was someone who knew these woods intimately. You're making a mistake, I called out, slowly backing toward Marlowe while trying to watch all directions at once. I've already called for backup. They know exactly where I am. More laughter. Do they, River? Because I've been monitoring your radio traffic all evening. Quite fascinating, actually, listening to you check in with base every 30 minutes like a good little rookie. Very by the book. My blood chilled. He'd been listening to my transmissions. That meant he had a police scanner, or... Surprised? You shouldn't be. I know those protocols better than you do. Hell, I wrote half of them when I worked here. When he worked here? My mind raced through the implications. An ex-employee. Someone with insider knowledge of ranger procedures, radio frequencies, patrol routes. You're wondering who I am, aren't you, River? Let me give you a hint. I trained 3 classes of rookies just like you. Taught them all about wilderness safety, search and rescue, emergency protocols. Always emphasized the buddy system. Never go alone into dangerous situations. I reached Marlowe and began working at her bonds with one hand, while keeping my weapon trained on the darkness with the other. The rope was secured with military precision knots designed to be difficult to untie quickly. You're Garrett Voss, I said suddenly, the name coming from some half-remembered briefing. You were fired 2 years ago. Very good. See, you were paying attention during orientation. Yes, I'm Garrett Voss. 23 years with the Park Service before some bleeding heart bureaucrats decided I was too aggressive in my law enforcement duties. Apparently, using appropriate force against poachers and vandals is now considered excessive. I remembered more now. Voss had been terminated for brutality complaints, something about beating a camper who'd been collecting arrowheads in violation of park regulations. There had been whispers about other incidents, a pattern of escalating violence that the administration had finally been forced to address. So what is this, Voss? Revenge against the Park Service? Revenge? He sounded genuinely puzzled. River, you misunderstand completely. This isn't revenge. This is evolution. I managed to loosen one of Marlowe's wrist restraints. She immediately began working at the duct tape over her mouth, her eyes never leaving the darkness beyond my flashlight. You see, Voss continued, his voice now coming from somewhere to my left. I realized something during my last few years on the job. All those search and rescue operations, all those lost hikers and campers. Most of the time, they weren't really lost. They were just unprepared. Soft. City people playing at wilderness adventure without understanding what the forest really is. I freed Marlowe's other wrist and she pulled the tape from her mouth, gasping. He's been keeping me here for 3 days, she whispered. Playing with me. He said he was waiting for you. Waiting for me. This whole thing had been a setup. Marlowe hadn't gotten lost or injured during her research. She'd been used as bait to draw in a rescue team. To draw in me. Why me? I called out to the darkness. Because you're perfect, River. Young, inexperienced, eager to prove yourself. You were always going to come alone, always going to bend the rules to help someone in distress. I've been watching you for months, studying your patrol patterns, your responses to situations. You're so beautifully predictable. Marlowe was working at the ropes around her ankles while I kept watch. The forest had gone completely silent around us. No insect sounds, no small animal movement, as if every living thing had fled the area. What do you want? I demanded. I want to teach you something, River. Something they don't cover in your training manuals. I want to show you what real wilderness survival looks like. Not the sanitized, safety-first version they teach at the academy, but the truth. The forest is about predator and prey. The strong survive, the weak become food. A branch snapped somewhere behind me. I spun, but Voss was already speaking from a different direction. For the past 2 years, I've been living the real wilderness life. No supply runs to town, no backup communications, no safety nets. Just me against the forest, and guess what? I won. I adapted. I evolved. Marlowe had freed her legs and was struggling to stand. 3 days of captivity had left her weak and shaky, but she was mobile. I've been studying you urban predators too, Voss continued. Hikers, campers, researchers like your friend there. Soft targets who think they understand nature because they read about it in books. It's been educational. The tally marks on the nurse log. My stomach lurched as I understood what they represented. How many? I whispered. Does it matter? Each one taught me something new. Your friend Marlowe, for instance. She taught me patience. 3 days I kept her here, fed her just enough to stay conscious, while I prepared for your arrival. She was excellent bait. I needed to get us out of here, but I didn't know the forest well enough to navigate in the darkness. Voss had every advantage. Terrain knowledge, night vision adapted from 2 years of living rough, and the predator's greatest asset. He had chosen the time and place for this confrontation. The thing about rookie rangers, Voss said, and his voice was definitely closer now, is that they follow procedure even when procedure will get them killed. You should have waited for backup, River. You should have called in more resources, established a perimeter, treated this like the tactical situation it is. He was right, and we both knew it. I'd made every mistake in the book, let emotion override training, walked right into his trap. But that's what makes this interesting, he continued. You're going to have to abandon everything you've learned, everything you think you know about being a ranger, if you want to survive the next few hours. A flashlight beam suddenly blazed to life from across the clearing, blinding me. I raised my weapon but couldn't see anything beyond the glare. There's no backup coming, River. I've been monitoring all radio frequencies. Your supervisor thinks you're conducting a routine grid search that won't be completed until dawn. No one's expecting you back for hours. The light clicked off, leaving me night-blind and disoriented. In the darkness that followed, I heard movement, fast, purposeful, coming from multiple directions at once. "Run," I whispered to Marlowe. "Back toward the trail. Follow my tracks." "I can't see." "Feel for the broken branches, the disturbed ground. Move." I heard her stumbling away through the underbrush, and then Voss was laughing again. "Splitting up? That's not very professional, Ranger Nakamura. How are you going to protect and serve if you abandon the victim?" He was right again. I was making decisions based on panic, not training. But my training hadn't prepared me for this scenario. A predator who understood our procedures better than I did. I followed Marlowe's sounds through the forest, trying to stay between her and wherever I thought Voss might be. My night vision was slowly returning, enough to make out the vague shapes of trees and the pale patches where my flashlight had disturbed the moss on the ground. "This is what I'm talking about, River," Voss called out, his voice echoing through the trees. "Finally, you're learning. Forget the manual, forget the procedures. Trust your instincts. Become the predator instead of the prey." A branch whipped across my face, drawing blood. I could hear Marlowe ahead of me, breathing hard, moving as quietly as she could manage. We were maybe halfway back to her campsite, but it felt like miles in the suffocating darkness. That's when I realized the forest had become completely silent again. No sounds of pursuit, no more taunting from Voss. Even Marlowe had stopped moving ahead of me. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the steady drip of condensation from the canopy above. "Marlowe," I whispered. Silence. I crept forward, weapon ready, trying to move as quietly as possible through the underbrush. Where the trail should have been, I found only virgin forest, no broken branches, no disturbed ground, no sign that anyone had passed this way. I was lost. In 8 months of working Olympic National Park, I'd never been truly lost. Turned around, maybe, temporarily disoriented, but always able to find my bearings. Now, in the darkness with adrenaline clouding my judgment, I couldn't tell north from south. Voss had planned this too. He'd herded me away from any landmarks I might recognize, deeper into the trackless forest where his territorial advantage was absolute. "Feeling a little lost, River?" The voice was directly behind me. I spun, finger on trigger, but saw only trees and shadows. It's amazing how quickly civilization falls away, isn't it? All your training, all your equipment, all your procedures, useless when you're operating on my terms, in my territory. I backed against a large cedar, trying to put something solid behind me. "Where's Marlowe?" "Safe for now. I needed her to get you away from the clearing, away from any chance of finding your way back. But don't worry about her. Worry about yourself." Something whistled through the air near my head. A thrown rock or stick. I flinched instinctively, and in that moment of distraction, heard footsteps moving past me in the darkness. He was fast. Military training maybe, or just 2 years of living like a predator in the woods. I was a rookie ranger with 8 months of experience and academy training that felt increasingly worthless with every passing minute. You know what your biggest mistake was, River. You assumed I was just another angry ex-employee, some disgruntled loser acting out his frustrations on innocent people. Another projectile flew past me from a different direction. He was circling me, staying just outside my vision while keeping me pinned against the tree. But I'm not angry at all. I'm grateful. Getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to discover what I really am. Not a public servant, not a protector of tourists and weekend warriors. I'm an apex predator. I tried to remember my academy training about dealing with mentally disturbed subjects. De-escalation techniques, talking them down, finding common ground. But Voss wasn't ranting or raving. He sounded completely rational, eerily calm. That made him infinitely more dangerous. "The first one was an accident," he continued, his voice now coming from somewhere to my left. "A backpacker who got aggressive when I told him he was camping in a restricted area. I defended myself. maybe used a little more force than necessary. When I realized he was dead, I had a choice: report it and face murder charges or dispose of the evidence. I eased away from the tree, trying to put some distance between myself and his voice, but he seemed to anticipate my movement, staying just out of sight while maintaining his psychological pressure. Disposing of a body in the wilderness is surprisingly easy when you know the terrain. The forest recycles everything eventually. But what surprised me was how satisfying it felt. How right. Here was someone who thought he could just walk into my forest, ignore the rules, show disrespect for the ecosystem. My foot caught on something in the darkness, a root or fallen branch, and I stumbled. In the instant it took me to regain my balance, I heard him move closer. After that, I started paying attention to the types of people who visit the park. The ones who litter, who harass wildlife, who think nature exists for their entertainment. Social media influencers taking selfies with wild animals. Campers who leave food out to attract bears. Hikers who go off trail and damage sensitive ecosystems. A chill ran down my spine as I understood what he was describing. Voss wasn't just a killer. He was a killer who believed he was doing righteous work. Each one taught me something new about hunting, about fear, about the primal relationship between predator and prey. Your friend Marlo was particularly instructive. She lasted 3 days, 3 days of me explaining to her exactly what she'd done wrong, why she deserved what was happening to her. She was conducting legitimate research, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She had all the proper permits. Laughter echoed through the trees. Permits? You still don't understand, do you, River? This isn't about bureaucracy or regulations. This is about natural law. The strong take what they want from the weak. The forest doesn't care about your permits. I was moving again, trying to put more distance between us, when I heard something that made my blood freeze. Marlo screaming, not far away, maybe 50 meters, her voice raw with terror and pain. It lasted only a few seconds before cutting off abruptly, leaving the forest silent again. "What did you do?" I shouted, abandoning any pretense of stealth. "Nothing permanent, yet. But she's back under my control now, tied to a tree about 20 meters from where you're standing. The question is, River, are you going to try to save her?" It was another trap. He was using Marlo as bait again, trying to draw me into a position where he'd have every advantage. The smart tactical move would be to try to reach the trail, get back to civilization, return with a properly equipped SWAT team. But I could still hear Marlo whimpering somewhere in the darkness, barely audible but definitely real. She was hurt, terrified, depending on me to save her. "You're learning, aren't you?" Voss said softly. "Learning that all your training, all your noble intentions don't mean anything when you're faced with real choices. Save the victim and probably die, or save yourself and definitely live with the guilt forever." He was right. I was paralyzed by the impossible choice, exactly as he'd planned. This is what separates predators from prey, River. Predators make hard decisions quickly. Prey hesitate, second-guess themselves, get consumed by their own uncertainty. Marlo screamed again, longer this time, a sound of pure agony that cut through the forest like a knife. I ran toward the sound. It was stupid, reckless, exactly what Voss wanted me to do. But I couldn't listen to another human being tortured while I stood by calculating odds and tactical advantages. I crashed through the underbrush following her cries, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across moss-covered logs and hanging branches. Behind me, I could hear Voss following. Not hurrying, just maintaining pursuit with the confidence of a predator who knew his prey was moving exactly where he wanted them to go. I found her tied to a western hemlock, arms pulled behind her around the trunk, legs bound at the ankles. But it was obviously another setup. She was positioned perfectly for me to approach from one direction, while Voss could attack from any of several others. "River," she gasped as I reached her. "Don't, it's a trap." "I know," I said, working at her bonds while trying to watch the darkness around us. "But I can't leave you here. He's been playing with us all night," she whispered. "This isn't about killing us quickly. He wants to break us first." The ropes were secured with the same military knots as before, designed to resist quick release. I was making progress, but slowly. and I could feel Voss moving through the forest around us, taking his time, savoring our desperation. "Tell me about his equipment," I whispered as I worked. "What weapons does he have?" "Knife, big hunting knife. Some kind of club, maybe a baton. And he's got he's got ranger equipment. Radio, GPS, everything. He said he's been intercepting communications all over the park." That explained how he'd known about Marlowe's disappearance, how he'd been able to monitor my radio calls. With the right equipment and knowledge of our frequencies, he could listen to everything. Patrol schedules, backup requests, tactical communications. I freed one of her wrists, and she immediately began working on the other rope while I kept watch. "There's something else," she whispered urgently. "He's not alone." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "I heard him talking to someone earlier. Another voice giving him updates about your location, your approach routes. River, I think there are 2 of them." Before I could process this information fully, my radio crackled to life. "Ranger 247, this is base. Please respond with your current status." It was Martinez's voice, but something was wrong with the transmission. The timing was off, and there was a quality to the audio that seemed artificial. "River," Marlowe hissed. "Don't answer that. He's been imitating radio traffic all night." But even as she said it, I was reaching for my radio. 8 months of conditioning, of following procedures, of responding immediately to supervisor contact. "Base, this is 247. I'm at the subject's location with some complications. Requesting immediate backup." "Copy. 247. We're tracking your GPS signal. Backup is en route, ETA 15 minutes. Maintain position and await assistance." I felt a surge of relief, but Marlowe was shaking her head frantically. "That's not real," she whispered. "River, that's him. He's been doing that all night. Fake radio calls, fake backup promises, no one's coming." As if to confirm her words, Voss's laughter echoed through the trees around us. Very convincing, wasn't it? 23 years with the Park Service teaches you a lot about radio protocols. I can sound like anyone you want to hear, your supervisor, dispatch, even other rangers. The full scope of his preparation hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't just planned to hunt us, he'd planned to psychologically torture us, to use our own training and procedures against us, to make us complicit in our own destruction. "How long have you been planning this?" I called out to the darkness. "Since the day they fired me, but specifically targeting you, River. About 6 months. I've been studying you, learning your patterns, your responses to stress situations. You're very consistent, always trying to do the right thing, always putting the victim's safety ahead of your own. It's admirable, really. Also fatal." Marlowe had freed her second wrist and was working on her ankles. I could hear her crying softly as she worked. Not from fear, I realized, but from rage. 3 days of captivity, of psychological torture, of being used as bait to lure other victims. "Why us?" I asked, still trying to buy time while she freed herself. "Why target park rangers specifically?" "Because you replaced me," Voss said simply. "Every rookie they hire is a reminder that the Park Service thought I was disposable. Every time I see one of you young rangers on patrol, following the same routes I used to patrol, protecting the same ungrateful tourists I used to protect, it reinforces the insult." His voice was getting closer, more intimate, as if he was enjoying this confession. "But it's more than that, River. Rangers represent everything I've grown to despise about modern civilization. This illusion that we can control nature, manage it, make it safe for people who have no business being here. The forest doesn't need managing, it needs culling." Marlowe had freed her legs and was standing on unsteady feet. I helped support her while keeping my weapon trained on the darkness around us. "We need to move," I whispered to her. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though I could feel her trembling against me. 3 days of minimal food and water, constant stress and psychological torture had left her weak but functional. "Where?" she whispered back. "He knows these woods better than anyone. He's been living out here for 2 years." She was right. We couldn't outrun him or out-navigate him. Our only advantages were my weapon and the possibility that he might underestimate us, though given his obvious intelligence and preparation, that seemed unlikely. The thing about apex predators, River, Voss continued, his voice now coming from multiple directions as he moved through the forest around us, is that they understand patience. I could end this any time I want. But where's the education in that? Where's the growth? We started moving, me supporting Marlowe while trying to maintain 360-degree awareness of our surroundings. I'd given up any hope of finding the trail back to her campsite. Now I was just trying to stay alive long enough for real backup to arrive if it ever would. I want you to understand something before this ends, Voss said, his voice closer now. This isn't personal. You seem like a decent person, River. Under other circumstances, I might have enjoyed training you, teaching you real wilderness survival. A branch snapped somewhere behind us. I turned, weapon ready, but saw nothing. But you represent something I can't allow to continue. This fantasy that nature can be tamed, that wilderness can be made safe for people who don't respect it. Every time the Park Service sends out another soft, inexperienced ranger like you, they're perpetuating a lie. We were moving through an area of old blowdowns, massive trees that had fallen during some long-ago storm, creating a maze of moss-covered logs and debris. The footing was treacherous, and Marlowe was struggling to keep up. The truth is that nature is cruel, arbitrary, and unforgiving. The strong survive by taking what they need from the weak. The forest doesn't recognize your authority, your training, or your good intentions. I could hear him moving parallel to us, matching our pace but staying out of sight. He was herding us again, guiding us towards some predetermined destination. The real tragedy, River, is that you probably would have learned this eventually. A few more years on the job, a few more cases where your procedures failed and people died despite your best efforts. You would have realized that being a ranger isn't about protecting people. It's about managing the inevitable casualties. We'd reached the center of the blowdown area, where several massive logs had fallen across each other to form a natural shelter. Under other circumstances, it would have been a perfect place to wait out a storm. Now, it felt like a trap. This is where it ends, River. His voice was directly ahead of us, no longer trying to maintain concealment. I raised my weapon, but in the darkness between the fallen logs, I couldn't see him. You have a choice to make. Probably the last meaningful choice of your life. A spotlight blazed to life, blinding me completely. But instead of being directed at us, it was aimed upward, illuminating the canopy above and casting everything below into deep shadow. I'm holding a knife to your friend Marlowe's throat. My heart stopped. I spun toward where I'd thought she was beside me, but felt only empty air. In the confusion of navigating through the blowdown, in the darkness and disorientation, he'd somehow taken her again. How? 23 years of experience, River. You learned to move silently, to use terrain and distraction to your advantage. While you were focused on my voice, I was repositioning. The spotlight shifted slightly and I could make out two silhouettes among the fallen logs. Voss behind Marlowe, one arm around her waist, the other holding something that glinted against her neck. Here's your choice, he continued calmly. Drop your weapon and I'll make this quick for both of you. Try to be a hero and I'll let you watch while I take my time with her. And River? I've gotten very creative over the past 2 years. Marlowe's eyes met mine across the 20 feet that separated us. Even in the harsh light, I could see the terror there, but also something else. A fierce determination that reminded me why she'd chosen to do her research alone in one of the most remote wilderness areas in North America. Don't, she said clearly. River, don't give up your weapon. Voss chuckled. Brave girl, but impractical. River knows that her ranger training emphasizes de-escalation and victim protection above personal safety. Don't you, River? He was right again. Every scenario we'd trained for emphasized protecting civilians, even at the cost of officer safety. But those scenarios had never involved a predator who understood our training better than we did. You have 10 seconds to decide, Voss said. Then I start cutting and your friend here learns what it feels like to die slowly in the wilderness she loves so much. I looked at my service weapon, then at Marlowe, then into the darkness beyond Voss's spotlight. Somewhere out there was a forest full of hiding places, escape routes, resources I didn't know how to use. But dropping my weapon meant certain death for both of us. Keeping it meant probable death, but at least a chance. 5 seconds, River. I made my choice. Instead of dropping the weapon, I switched off my flashlight and dove sideways into the darkness between the logs, rolling behind the massive trunk of a fallen cedar. Voss's spotlight immediately swung toward where I'd been standing, but I was already moving, crawling through the maze of debris and undergrowth. Marlowe screamed, pain, not fear, and I heard the sound of a struggle. But I couldn't help her by getting myself killed. I had to think tactically now, forget everything except survival. Interesting choice, Voss called out, his voice tight with the first real anger I'd heard from him. I'm disappointed, River. I thought you cared more about innocent life. I was moving as quietly as possible through the blowdown, trying to circle around behind his position. The spotlight was still sweeping the area where I'd disappeared, creating moving shadows that might provide cover. She's bleeding now, he continued conversationally. Nothing fatal yet, just enough to reinforce the lesson about consequences. Every minute you hide, every minute you play soldier instead of doing your job, she suffers more. Psychological warfare. He was trying to make me act emotionally, to abandon any tactical advantage I might gain. But I could hear in his voice that I'd surprised him. He'd expected me to surrender, to follow the victim protection protocols he knew so well. For the first time since this nightmare began, I'd done something he hadn't planned for. I reached the edge of the blowdown area and stopped to listen. The forest was still unnaturally quiet. No insect sounds, no small animal movement. Even the wind seemed to have died, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. But I could hear something else now. Breathing. Heavy, controlled breathing coming from behind me. I spun around just as a massive shape launched itself from the darkness between two fallen logs. Voss hit me like a linebacker, driving me backward into a tangle of branches and moss. My weapon went flying, disappearing into the undergrowth. We went down hard, him on top trying to pin my arms while I fought to get leverage. He was stronger than I'd expected, not just from 2 years of wilderness living, but genuinely powerful. Military training, probably, or maybe just the kind of strength that came from constant physical challenges. There we go, he grunted as we struggled. Now we're getting somewhere. This is what I wanted to see. The real River Nakamura, not the by-the-book rookie. I managed to get one arm free and drove an elbow into his ribs, hard enough to make him grunt and shift his weight. In that instant, I rolled out from under him and scrambled away through the debris. But he was fast, faster than someone his size should have been, with the kind of conditioning that came from hunting and being hunted in the wilderness. He caught my ankle as I tried to stand, sending me sprawling again. You know what your real problem is, River? He said, hauling me back toward him. You still think this is a law enforcement situation. Arrest the bad guy, read him his rights, let the justice system sort it out. I kicked backward with my free leg, connecting with something solid. His grip loosened enough for me to break away again, but I could hear him laughing as I crawled through the maze of fallen timber. But there is no justice system out here. No backup, no procedures, no civilization. Just predator and prey, just like it's always been. I found my feet and ran blindly through the darkness, branches whipping across my face, roots and debris threatening to send me sprawling with every step. Behind me I could hear him following, not running, just maintaining steady pursuit with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where this chase would lead. The blowdown area ended abruptly at the edge of a steep ravine. I skidded to a stop just inches from a drop-off that disappeared into blackness. The sound of running water echoed from somewhere far below. Nowhere to go, River. I turned to find Voss standing 20 feet away, no longer bothering with stealth. In the faint starlight filtering through the canopy, I could see that he was bigger than I'd imagined. At least 6'2", maybe 200 pounds of muscle and bone and predatory confidence. This is good, he said, nodding approvingly. You're finally thinking like a survivor instead of a civil servant, but you're still reacting instead of planning, still letting me dictate the terms of engagement. He started walking toward me slowly, casually, like someone approaching a nervous animal. The thing about apex predators, River, is that we understand patience. I don't need to catch you right now. I don't need to overpower you through brute force. I just need to keep you moving until you make a mistake, until exhaustion and fear override your judgment. He was right again. I was breathing hard from the fight and the chase, my heart hammering against my ribs. Meanwhile, he seemed completely calm, as if this were just another evening walk through his territory. "Where's Marlo?" I demanded, trying to buy time while I looked for escape routes. "Safe for now. Tied up again, but alive. Whether she stays that way depends on how quickly you accept reality." "What reality?" "That you were never the predator in this scenario, River. You were always the prey. From the moment you received that missing person report, you were following a script I wrote. Every decision you made, every procedure you followed, brought you exactly where I wanted you. The edge of the ravine was maybe 3 feet behind me. I couldn't see the bottom, couldn't gauge the drop or what might be waiting below, but staying here meant certain death. Even now you're thinking about jumping, aren't you?" Voss said, reading my body language with predatory precision. "Wondering if you can survive the fall, if there's deep water at the bottom, if you might find another way to escape." He was 15 feet away now, close enough that I could see the details of his face in the starlight. Weathered, bearded, with the lean look of someone who'd been living on whatever the forest provided. But his eyes were the worst part, completely rational, utterly without remorse. "Here's what you don't understand about that ravine, River. It's about 40 feet to the water, and the creek is maybe 18 inches deep this time of year. You'll break both legs on impact if you're lucky. More likely, you'll shatter your spine and spend your last few minutes paralyzed in freezing water, listening to me finish what I started with your friend." 10 feet away. I could smell him now. Wood smoke, unwashed clothing, and something else. Something organic and wrong that made my stomach clench. "But I'm going to give you one more chance to do the right thing. Come with me quietly, and I'll make sure Marlo doesn't suffer unnecessarily. Fight me, run from me, make this difficult, and I'll keep both of you alive for days while I demonstrate what real wilderness education looks like." 5 feet. Close enough to attack. Close enough that any move I made would have to be perfect. "What's it going to be, Ranger Nakamura?" I looked into his eyes and saw my own death reflected there. Not just death, but the promise of prolonged agony, psychological torture designed to break my spirit before destroying my body. So I jumped. The fall seemed to last forever. Wind rushing past my face, the sound of water growing louder, Voss shouting something behind me that was lost in the roar of my descent. I had time to think about Marlo, about my family, about all the things I'd never get to do if this went wrong. Then I hit. Not water, rock. A ledge maybe 15 feet down from the rim, hidden in the darkness and covered with moss that provided just enough cushioning to keep the impact from killing me outright. I rolled, trying to absorb the force of the landing, and felt something snap in my left shoulder. Pain exploded through my entire left side, but I was alive, conscious, and hidden in the shadow of the ravine wall. Above me, I could hear Voss swearing creatively as he realized I'd found an escape route he hadn't anticipated. "Very good, River," he called down. "I'm impressed, but you're only postponing the inevitable. That ledge doesn't go anywhere, and you're injured. I can wait." He was right about the ledge. It was maybe 10 feet wide and extended only 20 feet along the ravine wall before ending at another drop-off. But he was wrong about being able to wait, because I could hear something he apparently couldn't. Helicopter rotors in the distance growing closer. Real backup, real search and rescue. Not another one of his psychological games. Someone had finally realized that Ranger 247 was overdue and initiated a genuine emergency response. "Do you hear that, Voss?" I called up to him. "That's a Park Service helicopter. They're tracking my GPS signal." Silence from above. Then, after a long moment, laughter. "Your GPS signal, River? You mean this GPS signal?" Something small and electronic bounced off the rocks near me. My GPS unit. The screen cracked, but the LED still blinking. "I've had this for the past hour," he continued. "Took it when we were wrestling, along with your radio and your spare batteries. As far as anyone knows, you're still conducting a routine grid search about 2 miles from here. The helicopter sound was getting closer, but Voss was right. They'd be searching in the wrong area, following a GPS signal that he'd been carrying while stalking us through the forest. But you've given me an idea, he said. Maybe it's time to expand this little educational exercise. A helicopter crew would make excellent additional subjects for my research. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Voss wasn't just planning to kill Marlowe and me. He was planning to use us to lure in more victims, the helicopter crew, the ground teams that would inevitably follow, maybe even my supervisor Martinez. I had to warn them somehow, had to find a way to break his control of the situation. That's when I noticed something else about the ledge. The moss I'd landed on wasn't natural growth. It had been deliberately placed here, arranged to cushion a fall, and carved into the rock wall behind me were more of those tally marks, dozens of them. This wasn't the first time Voss had used this ravine as part of his hunting ground. The ledge was a trap, designed to catch anyone desperate enough to jump. How many others had made the same choice I had, only to find themselves broken and helpless while he took his time getting down to finish them? But I wasn't broken. Injured, yes, but mobile. And now I was angry. For 8 months, I'd been the rookie ranger, the inexperienced one, the weak link who needed protection and guidance. But Marlowe had survived 3 days of psychological torture because she was tougher than anyone gave her credit for. And I'd survived everything Voss had thrown at me tonight because I was stronger than he'd calculated. Maybe it was time to stop being the prey. The helicopter was directly overhead now, searchlights sweeping the forest canopy. I could hear Voss moving above me, probably getting into position to signal them, to play the role of helpful local who'd spotted something suspicious. I started climbing. The ravine wall was steep, but not impossible, with enough handholds and footing for someone desperate enough to try. My injured shoulder screamed with every movement, but adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. I climbed slowly, quietly, using techniques I'd learned during ranger training. Not for tactical operations, but for wildlife observation, for getting close to animals without disturbing them. Now I was the predator. I reached the rim just as the helicopter began to descend, its downdraft flattening the vegetation and filling the air with debris. Through the chaos of wind and noise, I could see Voss maybe 30 feet away, waving his arms and shouting something at the aircraft, playing the concerned citizen, the helpful witness who'd spotted something the search teams had missed. I couldn't let him reach that helicopter crew. I found a fallen branch about the size of a baseball bat. Solid hardwood, heavy enough to do serious damage. My service weapon was somewhere in the undergrowth, probably impossible to find in the darkness. But this would work. Voss was so focused on the helicopter that he didn't notice me approaching from behind. 20 feet, 15, 10. Close enough to hear him shouting over the rotor noise. Down here, I saw someone fall. They might be injured. 5 feet. Close enough to strike. I swung the branch like a batter going for a home run, putting all my weight and momentum behind it. It connected with the back of his skull with a sound like splitting wood. He went down hard, rolling forward into the ferns and moss. For a moment I thought I'd killed him. Hoped I'd killed him. But then I saw him moving, trying to push himself up on his hands and knees. The helicopter was landing now, its searchlight sweeping across us. I could see the crew preparing to deploy, rappelling gear and medical equipment ready for a rescue operation. Stay down, I shouted at Voss, raising the branch for another strike. He looked up at me, blood streaming from a gash on his scalp, and smiled. There she is, he said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter noise. There's the predator I knew you could become. That's when I heard Marlowe screaming, not from nearby, but from somewhere deeper in the forest, her voice thin with distance and terror. Voss had left her tied up somewhere while he stalked us through the blowdown, and now the helicopter noise was probably terrifying her, making her think we'd all been killed or abandoned her. I looked at Voss, then toward the sound of Marlowe's voice, then at the helicopter crew who were about to walk into a situation they couldn't possibly understand. Where is she? I demanded. He just smiled wider, blood still streaming down his face. The first crew member rappelled down from the helicopter. moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. As his boots touched the ground, he immediately began scanning the area for casualties. "Ranger Nakamura," he called out, his voice cutting through the rotor wash. "We're here to extract you and the missing person." I wanted to warn him, to explain about Voss, to make sure he understood the danger. But Marlowe's screams were getting more desperate, more panicked. Voss was watching me with predatory amusement, waiting to see what I'd choose. Save the helicopter crew from a threat they didn't know existed, or abandon them to save Marlowe from whatever psychological torture he'd designed for her. The same impossible choice he'd been forcing on me all night. But I was done playing by his rules. "Officer down," I shouted to the rescue crew, pointing at Voss. "Suspect is armed and extremely dangerous. He's responsible for the missing person case and at least one assault on a federal officer." The crew member immediately shifted into tactical mode, speaking rapidly into his radio while keeping his eyes on Voss. Within seconds, 2 more crew members were on the ground, and I could hear radio chatter coordinating with law enforcement. Voss's smile faded as he realized his plan was falling apart. "You don't understand," he said, trying to sit up. "She's still out there, still tied up. If you arrest me now, you'll never find her in time." The final manipulation. Even facing capture, he was trying to use Marlowe as leverage to make me complicit in his escape. But I could still hear her voice, distant but clear enough to triangulate. And now I had backup, real backup, with proper equipment and tactical training. "Northwest," I told the crew chief, pointing toward the sound of Marlowe's voice. "Maybe 200 meters. She's been held captive for 3 days." 2 crew members immediately headed in that direction while the third secured Voss with flex cuffs. Professional, efficient, exactly the kind of response I should have called for hours ago. "Interesting lesson, isn't it?" Voss said as they lifted him to his feet. "About the importance of backup, about not trying to be a hero." I looked at him, bloodied, defeated, facing decades in federal prison, and felt nothing but disgust. "The only thing you taught me," I said, "is that the most dangerous predators are the ones who think they're justified." They found Marlowe 20 minutes later, dehydrated and traumatized but alive. The medical team started IV fluids and trauma counseling while the tactical team secured the area and began processing what would become the largest crime scene in Olympic National Park history. Over the following weeks, investigators would discover the remains of 7 other victims scattered throughout the remote areas where Voss had been living. Hikers, campers, researchers, all people who'd made the mistake of venturing alone into territory he'd claimed as his own. The tally marks on the nurse logs told the story of a 2-year reign of terror that no one had even realized was happening. The wilderness that was supposed to be a refuge, a place where people could connect with nature and find peace, had become a hunting ground for someone who'd twisted conservation into an excuse for murder. I spent 3 days in the hospital, getting my shoulder repaired and talking to FBI psychologists who specialized in trauma counseling. They told me I'd done everything right, that I'd survived an encounter with a sophisticated predator who'd had every possible advantage. But I knew better. I'd made every mistake in the book, ignored procedures, acted on emotion instead of training, put both myself and Marlowe at unnecessary risk. If that helicopter hadn't been conducting a routine training exercise in the area, if they hadn't heard my missed radio check-ins, if they hadn't decided to investigate, the what-ifs would haunt me for months afterward. Martinez visited me on my last day in the hospital. He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside my bed and didn't say anything for a long time. "You know," he finally said, "Voss trained me too. Back in 2018 when I was new to the park, he was a good ranger then, or at least I thought he was. Knew the wilderness better than anyone, could track anything, could survive in conditions that would kill most people." He paused, staring out the window at the parking lot. What I didn't realize was that he was already changing, already starting to see people as either predators or prey. The warning signs were there, the way he talked about problem visitors, the satisfaction he took in confronting people who broke regulations, the gradual isolation from other staff. Could anyone have stopped him? I asked. Martinez shrugged. Maybe, if we'd intervened earlier, gotten him psychological help, recognized that his dedication to the wilderness was becoming something unhealthy. But he was good at his job, and we were always short-staffed, always dealing with budget cuts and personnel issues. He looked at me directly for the first time since entering the room. "The thing is, River, what you did out there, surviving, adapting, ultimately saving both yourself and the victim, that's not something they teach at the academy. That comes from something deeper, something that can't be trained." I went back to work 6 weeks later, but everything was different. The forest I'd loved, the wilderness that had called me to become a ranger, now felt alien and threatening. Every shadow could hide a predator. Every sound could signal danger. Every lone hiker could be either victim or threat. The other rangers tried to be supportive, but I could see the way they looked at me. I was the rookie who'd survived something they couldn't imagine, who'd been changed by an experience that existed outside their frame of reference. Some nights, lying in bed in my small apartment near the park, I could still hear Voss's voice echoing through my memory. The forest doesn't need managing, it needs culling. And the terrible thing was, I was beginning to understand what he'd meant. Not the killing, not the twisted justification for murder, but the underlying truth about human nature and the wilderness. We told ourselves that national parks existed to preserve nature for future generations, to provide places where people could experience the natural world. But maybe that was just a comfortable lie. Maybe the real function of places like Olympic was to contain the wildness that still existed in some people, to provide an outlet for impulses that civilization couldn't completely suppress. Voss had been a predator long before he'd started killing people. The wilderness hadn't created his predatory nature. It had simply provided him with the perfect environment to express it. And if that was true, then how many other Garrett Vosses were out there? How many other people who'd been drawn to careers in wilderness management, not by love of nature, but by something darker and more complex? I lasted another 4 months before I submitted my resignation. Martinez accepted it without argument, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Another good ranger lost to trauma, another position that would be difficult to fill in an already understaffed service. "What will you do?" he asked as I cleaned out my locker. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Maybe something in urban law enforcement, something where the predators are more obvious." He nodded, understanding more than I'd expected. "River," he said as I headed for the door, "what you did out there, surviving Voss, saving Marlowe, that took real courage. Don't let what happened make you forget that." But as I drove away from Olympic National Park for the last time, I wasn't thinking about courage. I was thinking about adaptation, about the thin line between civilization and wilderness, about the predators who walk among us wearing masks of respectability and public service. Somewhere out there in forests and parks across the country, there might be others like Garrett Voss, others who'd learned to use their knowledge of wilderness and human nature to hunt the people they'd sworn to protect. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it made me angry. And anger, I was learning, could be just as powerful as fear in determining whether you became predator or prey. Maybe Martinez was right about courage. Maybe what I'd learned in those woods wasn't just about survival, but about the capacity to adapt, to become something harder and more dangerous when circumstances required it. Maybe the real lesson wasn't that the wilderness was full of predators. Maybe it was that sometimes, when pushed far enough, prey could learn to hunt back. I still think about Marlo Chen sometimes. She finished her research, published her paper on mycorrhizal networks, and got her doctorate. She sends me updates occasionally, emails with pictures of her current research sites, always careful to mention that she's never alone in the field anymore. She adapted too, in her own way. Learned to see the forest not as a place of infinite wonder and discovery, but as an environment that required constant vigilance, constant awareness of threats both natural and human. We both learned that the most dangerous predators don't announce themselves with growls or territorial markings. They use intelligence, patience, and intimate knowledge of their prey's behavior patterns. They look like park rangers, like helpful citizens, like people you should be able to trust. And sometimes, when the wilderness demands it, they look like us. My name is River Nakamura, and I survived my first year as a park ranger. What I learned in the forests of Olympic National Park isn't in any training manual, and it's not something I'd wish on anyone else. But it's knowledge I'll carry for the rest of my life. In any wilderness, the most dangerous predator is always human. And sometimes, to survive, you have to become the predator you're hunting. My name is Adam Moraine, and I am 27 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 8 months. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Dahlia Voss turned into something that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. I was still new to the job, only 8 months in, when the call came through dispatch at 4:47 p.m. on October 15th. The autumn darkness was already creeping through the towering Douglas firs, and the temperature had dropped to that bone-deep cold that makes your breath visible even through your uniform jacket. Ranger Supervisor Martinez's voice crackled through my radio with the kind of urgency that makes your stomach clench. "Adam, we've got a code yellow. Missing photographer, Dahlia Voss, 34 years old. Last known position was the Quinault River Trail, mile marker 7. She was documenting old-growth recovery patterns and missed her scheduled check-in 12 hours ago." I grabbed my pack, already feeling that familiar knot of anxiety that had plagued me since my first week on the job. Every call felt like a test I wasn't sure I'd pass. The other rangers had years of experience, instincts honed by countless searches. I had textbook knowledge and an overwhelming need to prove I belonged here. Copy that. Any additional details on the missing person? Vehicle's still at the trailhead. All her camping gear is accounted for, but her photography equipment is missing. She's an experienced hiker, knows the area. This isn't like her to go off trail without notification. The Quinault River Trail winds through some of the most remote sections of the park, where ancient trees create a canopy so dense that even midday feels like dusk. In October, with the shorter days and frequent fog rolling in from the Pacific, it becomes a maze of shadows and muffled sounds. Perfect place to get disoriented. Perfect place to disappear. I drove the 20-minute route to the trailhead with my emergency lights cutting through the gathering darkness. The parking area was empty except for a red Subaru Outback with Washington plates, Dahlia's car. I ran the plates through dispatch. Everything checked out. Insurance current, registration valid, no red flags. Just a woman who loved photographing nature and had somehow vanished into the wilderness. The metallic taste of adrenaline filled my mouth as I shouldered my pack and activated my GPS unit. Standard search protocol. Establish last known position. Work outward in expanding grids. Maintain radio contact every 30 minutes. I'd practiced this dozens of times in training, but the textbook scenarios never included the way fog muffles your radio calls or how your flashlight beam seems to get swallowed by the forest. The trail was well maintained for the first 3 miles. But beyond that, it became a narrow path threading between massive tree trunks. My boots crunched through layers of decomposing leaves, maple, alder, and fern fronds that created a carpet thick enough to hide any tracks. The beam of my flashlight revealed scratch marks on trees where bears had sharpened their claws, but no sign of human passage. At mile marker 7, I found the first evidence of Dahlia's presence. A lens cap from a Canon camera, partially buried under a pile of wet leaves. I photographed it in situ, then bagged it according to protocol. My hands were already numb from the cold, making it difficult to work the evidence bags properly. In training, we'd never dealt with weather this miserable. Dispatch, this is Ranger Moraine. I've located possible evidence at mile 7, proceeding with expanded search pattern. Static crackled back at me. The radio signal was weaker than expected for this location. I checked my GPS. The satellite connection was solid, showing my exact coordinates. But something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. In 8 months of patrols, I'd never experienced such complete silence. No bird calls. No rustle of small animals in the underbrush. No wind through the branches. Even the ever-present sound of the distant river seemed muted. I followed standard search protocol, establishing a base point and working outward in concentric circles. 20 yards from the trail I found disturbed vegetation, branches broken at shoulder height, ferns trampled in a pattern consistent with someone pushing through the brush. My pulse quickened. This was it. This was how I'd prove myself as a competent ranger. The trail of broken vegetation led deeper into old-growth forest, away from any marked paths. I followed it carefully, photographing each sign, marking GPS waypoints. The trees here were ancient giants, some over 6 feet in diameter, their trunks disappearing into the fog above. Between them, visibility dropped to maybe 15 feet in any direction. That's when I noticed the smell. It started as something faint, almost masked by the rich odor of decomposing leaves and damp earth. But as I moved deeper into the forest, it became unmistakable, the sickly sweet stench of something rotting, something organic, something that had once been alive. My training kicked in. Possible human remains require immediate backup and crime scene protocols. I reached for my radio, but the static was worse now. Just white noise punctuated by occasional bursts of unintelligible voices from other frequencies bleeding through. I tried raising dispatch 3 times before accepting that I was on my own, until I could reach higher ground or move closer to a repeater tower. The source of the smell was a natural depression between 2 massive cedar trees, filled with what looked like a pile of forest debris. But as I approached with my flashlight, the beam revealed something that made my stomach lurch. Scattered among the leaves and branches were pieces of fabric, bright yellow fabric that matched the description of Dahlia's hiking jacket. I forced myself to move closer, fighting the urge to vomit. Mixed in with the fabric were other things, strips of leather that might have been from a camera strap, pieces of what looked like plastic housing from electronic equipment, and underneath it all, something pale that made every instinct scream at me to run. But I was a park ranger. I had protocols to follow. I photographed everything from multiple angles, documenting the scene even as my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the camera steady. The pale objects weren't bones, they were pieces of torn paper. Photographs. Dozens of black and white nature photographs, scattered and partially decomposed. One photo caught my attention because it was less damaged than the others. It showed the exact spot where I was standing, photographed from a higher angle. Someone had been watching this location. Someone had known I would come here. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a random accident scene. This was staged, arranged. The disturbed vegetation, the conveniently placed evidence, the photographs. Someone had created a trail for me to follow. Someone had wanted me to find this place. My radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. Through the static, I could hear a voice, but it wasn't dispatch. It was a man's voice, speaking quietly, almost whispering. Adam Moraine, 8 months on the job, still trying to prove you belong. Ice water flooded my veins. Someone was using my frequency. Someone who knew my name, my experience level, my insecurities. I spun around, flashlight beam sweeping the trees, but saw nothing except shadows that seemed to move independently of my light. Who is this? Identify yourself. Silence. Then, after a long moment, you're standing in my gallery, Adam. Do you like the exhibition? I backed away from the debris pile, my free hand moving instinctively to the pepper spray on my belt. Standard ranger equipment included bear spray and a radio, but no firearms. We weren't law enforcement. We were supposed to call for backup when situations escalated beyond our training. Dahlia Voss, I said into the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. Where is she? Closer than you think. She's been such a good sport about the whole thing. Very cooperative once she understood the rules of the game. The voice was calm, conversational, with just a hint of amusement that made my skin crawl. This wasn't some random psychopath having a breakdown. This was someone who enjoyed what he was doing, someone who had planned every detail. I needed to get out of there, call for backup, let the professionals handle this. But as I turned to retrace my steps, my flashlight beam caught something that stopped me cold. Fresh boot prints in the mud beside the trail. Large prints with a distinctive tread pattern leading away from the debris pile and deeper into the forest. The prints were recent, made within the last few hours based on how clearly defined they were in the soft earth, and they were accompanied by drag marks, as if someone had been pulling a heavy object. Every piece of training I'd received said to retreat, establish radio contact, wait for law enforcement backup. But those drag marks could mean Dahlia was still alive, still being moved. Every minute I spent following protocol could be a minute closer to her death. I made the decision that would haunt me forever. I followed the tracks. The trail led through increasingly dense forest, winding between ancient trees and over fallen logs thick as cars. Whoever I was following knew these woods intimately, choosing paths that were almost invisible, routes that avoided the worst of the undergrowth while staying completely off any marked trails. My radio remained silent except for occasional bursts of static. The GPS was still working, but I was moving into areas that weren't properly mapped, places where the green space on my device showed no detail except contour lines and the blue thread of the Quinault River somewhere to the south. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes, the tracks led to a game trail that wound uphill toward a rocky outcrop. The smell of wood smoke drifted down from above, mixed with something else, something cooking. My stomach rumbled despite the circumstances. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and the physical exertion combined with adrenaline was burning through my energy reserves. The game trail ended at a natural shelf of rock overlooking the river valley. Hidden among a cluster of boulders was a camp that looked semi-permanent, a military surplus shelter, carefully concealed fire ring, and what appeared to be a sophisticated radio setup with a tall antenna extending up between the trees. And sitting by the fire, very much alive, was a woman with dark hair wearing the remains of a yellow hiking jacket. "Dahlia," I called out, keeping my voice low. She looked up, and I could see her face in the firelight. Mid-30s, with the kind of tan that came from spending months outdoors. But her expression wasn't relief at seeing a ranger. It was terror. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't come any closer. He's watching." I froze. Flashlight beam trained on the ground between us. "Are you injured? Can you walk?" "He's been keeping me here for 3 days. He said someone would come looking. He said he was waiting for the right person." Her voice was barely audible, but in the still air, every word carried clearly. "He said he was waiting for someone young, someone inexperienced, someone who would make it interesting." The woods around us remained silent, but I could feel eyes watching from the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. Somewhere in those shadows was the man who had been speaking to me on the radio, the man who had arranged this entire scenario. "We're leaving," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Right now. Can you stand?" Dahlia shook her head. "My ankle. I think it's broken." He did it on purpose, to make sure I couldn't run. I moved closer, keeping my flashlight beam sweeping the perimeter of the camp. The radio equipment caught my attention. Military grade, definitely not standard camping gear. This wasn't some random survivalist. This was someone with training, resources, and a long-term plan. "What's his name? What does he look like?" "He calls himself Hunter, says he used to be Army, Special Forces. He's been living out here for years, completely off the grid." Dahlia's voice was getting stronger, but I could see her hands shaking in the firelight. "He hunts people, Adam. He hunts them for sport." The use of my name sent another chill down my spine. She knew who I was because he had told her, which meant this entire situation had been orchestrated specifically for me. "How many others?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "I don't know. He has photographs, dozens of them. People hiking alone, camping, fishing, all of them in the park, all of them." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I was examining her ankle when the voice came from directly behind me. "I was hoping you'd be more of a challenge." I spun around, flashlight beam revealing a man standing maybe 10 feet away. Tall, lean, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor living. He was wearing military-style clothing and woodland camouflage, and in his hands was a compound bow with an arrow nocked and ready. "You followed every breadcrumb exactly as planned," he continued, moving slowly to keep himself positioned between me and the trail back down the mountain. "Textbook search pattern, by-the-book evidence collection. You even photographed my little art installation." My hand moved toward the bear spray, but he noticed immediately. "I wouldn't. This arrow will punch through your chest before you clear the holster. And then Dahlia gets to watch you bleed out before we continue our game. What do you want? Entertainment. His smile was visible even in the dim light from the fire. Do you know how boring it gets, hunting deer and elk year after year? They're predictable, stupid. They follow the same trails, eat in the same places, run in straight lines when they're scared. He took a step closer, bow still trained on my chest. But humans are different. They think, they adapt, they make choices, and when they're really scared, when they realize they're going to die, they become capable of amazing things. Or they break completely. Either way, it's fascinating to watch. The Park Service knows where I am. I lied. They'll send backup when I don't report in. No, they won't. Your last radio check was 2 hours ago. Standard protocol gives solo rangers a 4-hour window before initiating search procedures, and I've been monitoring their frequencies all evening. No one's looking for you yet. He was right, and we both knew it. I'd violated protocol by following the trail alone, and now I was paying the price for my inexperience and desperation to prove myself. Here's how this works, Hunter said, settling into what was obviously a practiced explanation. I'm going to give you a 30-minute head start. You can take Dahlia if you want, but she'll slow you down significantly. Your choice. After 30 minutes, I come after you. And if we make it back to the trailhead, then you win. You and Dahlia get to go home, tell your story, become heroes. But if I catch you... He gestured toward the darkness beyond the firelight, where I now noticed several objects hanging from tree branches. Objects that looked suspiciously like clothing and equipment from other hikers. Other victims. You're insane. I'm bored. There's a difference. He lowered the bow slightly, though the arrow remained nocked. 30 minutes starts now. I looked at Dahlia, who was struggling to stand on her injured ankle. She was right. She would slow me down significantly. But I couldn't leave her. That wasn't who I was, regardless of the consequences. Come on, I said, helping her to her feet. We're getting out of here. Adam, he knows these woods better than anyone. He's been hunting here for years. You can't outrun him. Maybe not, but I'm not leaving you. Hunter watched with apparent amusement as I helped Dahlia away from the fire and toward the trail. As we reached the edge of the light, he called out one more time. Adam, just so you know, I've been watching you for weeks, learning your patrol routes, your habits, your weaknesses. This isn't random. You were chosen specifically because you're new, inexperienced, and desperate to prove yourself. All of which makes you more likely to take risks, more likely to end up exactly where you are right now. The words followed us into the darkness as we began our descent. Dahlia leaned heavily on my shoulder, her breathing labored from pain and fear. The trail that had seemed manageable on the way up became treacherous in the dark with an injured person. Every root and rock became a potential disaster. How do you know so much about me? I asked as we carefully navigated a particularly steep section. He has files, photographs, personnel records. He somehow got access to Park Service databases. He knows everything about all the rangers, schedules, experience levels, psychological profiles from the hiring process. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some random madman living in the woods. This was someone with connections, resources, and detailed inside information. Someone who had been planning this for a long time. We made slow progress down the mountain, stopping frequently to rest and for me to check our position on GPS. The device showed we were roughly 2 miles from the nearest marked trail, 3 miles from the trailhead in safety. At our current pace with Dahlia's injury, it would take hours to reach help. Hours we didn't have. Tell me about him, I said during one of our rest breaks. What else did he say? Any details that might help us? He said he was Special Forces, sniper. Did 3 tours in Afghanistan before he got discharged for psychological reasons. He's been living off the grid ever since, moving from park to park, national forest to national forest. How many parks? He mentioned Yellowstone, Glacier, North Cascades, said Olympic was his favorite because of the isolation and weather. Easier to make people disappear. We were moving again, working our way down a particularly difficult section of trail, when I heard it, a sound that made every muscle in my body tense with primal fear. Whistling. Someone was whistling a cheerful tune, moving through the forest parallel to our position. The sound was maybe 50 yards away, keeping pace with us but staying just out of sight. "Time's up," Dahlia whispered. I checked my watch. We'd been moving for exactly 30 minutes. The whistling stopped abruptly, replaced by a voice that carried clearly through the still air. "Ready or not, here I come." What followed was a nightmare of fear and exhaustion that lasted the next 4 hours. Hunter pursued us through the dark forest with the patience and skill of a predator who knew he held every advantage. He would appear briefly in the beam of my flashlight, just long enough for us to see him, then vanish back into the shadows. Sometimes he would call out helpful directions, sarcastically pointing out easier paths or warning us about dangerous terrain ahead. He was playing with us, demonstrating his complete control over the situation. The psychological warfare was devastating. Every shadow could hide an arrow. Every sound could be his approach. Dahlia became increasingly panicked, her breathing rapid and shallow, her grip on my arm so tight it left bruises. I tried to project calm confidence, but inside, I was terrified. My training had never covered anything like this. Search and rescue scenarios, yes. Wildlife encounters, medical emergencies, lost hikers, all of that was in the manual. But being hunted by a human predator who knew the terrain better than I did, there was no protocol for that. We reached the main trail around midnight, both of us exhausted and hypothermic. The temperature had dropped into the 30s and our clothes were soaked with sweat and dew. Dahlia was barely conscious, her injured ankle swollen to twice its normal size. 2 more miles, I told her, though I wasn't sure either of us had the strength left. That's when we saw the light ahead on the trail. A flashlight beam, moving toward us from the direction of the trailhead. My heart leaped with relief. Backup had finally arrived. Someone had noticed my extended absence and initiated a search. "Here," I called out, waving my own flashlight. "We're here." The approaching light stopped, then began moving faster in our direction. As it got closer, I could make out a figure in what looked like a Park Service uniform. "Ranger Moraine?" The voice was familiar. Ranger Thompson, one of the senior staff who had been with the park for over a decade. "Are you all right?" "We need immediate medical attention and law enforcement backup," I said as he approached. "There's someone in the backcountry hunting people. He's been holding Dahlia captive for 3 days." Thompson's flashlight beam played over both of us, assessing our condition. In the harsh LED light, I could see his weathered face creased with concern. "Hunting people? Adam, you look exhausted. Are you sure about what you think you saw?" "He had a camp, military equipment. He admitted to killing other hikers. He's been stalking park rangers, collecting information about us." Okay. Let's get you both back to the trailhead and sort this out." Thompson moved to Dahlia's other side, helping to support her weight. "Medical team is standing by at the parking area." Relief flooded through me as we began the final push toward safety. Thompson's presence changed everything. He was experienced, competent, someone who would know exactly how to handle the situation. For the first time in hours, I felt like we might actually survive. We were maybe a half-mile from the trailhead when Thompson spoke again. "Adam, can I ask you something? In all your training, did they ever teach you about situational awareness?" Something in his tone made me glance over at him. In the glow of his flashlight, I could see his face more clearly. The weathered features, the calm expression, the hint of amusement in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did they teach you to verify the identity of people you encounter in emergency situations?" The words hit me like ice water. Thompson's voice was different now, slightly deeper, more controlled. And his uniform, which had looked authentic in the darkness, was wrong in subtle ways. The patches were slightly off, the cut of the jacket not quite right. "You're him," I whispered. "Took you long enough to figure it out." Hunter, wearing Thompson's clothes, carrying Thompson's radio, speaking in Thompson's voice, smiled at me across Dahlia's hunched form. "I told you I'd been watching you for weeks. learning everything about your colleagues, your procedures, your protocols. Where's Thompson? Don't worry about Thompson. Worry about yourself. I tried to pull away, but he was ready for the movement. Something sharp pressed against my ribs, a knife blade held low and angled upward toward my heart. Keep walking. We're almost to the parking area. People will be looking for us. Dispatch knows our last position. Dispatch knows that Ranger Thompson responded to your missed check-in and initiated a search. They know he found you and radioed in an all clear. As far as anyone knows, you're safely off the mountain. We walked the final quarter mile in silence. My mind raced, trying to find some way out of the situation, but Hunter had thought of everything. He'd studied the park's procedures, our personnel, our communication protocols. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years. The trailhead was deserted except for 3 vehicles: Dahlia's Subaru, my Ranger truck, and a Park Service SUV that presumably belonged to the real Thompson. Hunter directed us toward the SUV, keeping the knife pressed against my side. "Here's what happens next," he said as we reached the vehicle. "You're going to help me load Dahlia into the back. Then we're going to take a little drive to a place I've prepared, somewhere much more private than the backcountry camp. Someone will find Thompson. When he doesn't report in, Thompson is at the bottom of a ravine about 5 miles from here. It'll be weeks before anyone finds the body, if they ever do. And when they do, it'll look like an accident. Experienced ranger, tragic fall in difficult terrain. These things happen." He opened the rear hatch of the SUV, revealing a space that had been modified with restraint points and what looked like a medical kit. Everything needed for a mobile torture chamber. That's when Dahlia, who had been silent and barely conscious for the last hour, suddenly lunged forward and grabbed Hunter's wrist. The move was so unexpected that he loosened his grip on the knife for just a moment. It was enough. I threw myself sideways, away from the blade, and rolled behind the SUV. Hunter cursed and tried to follow, but Dahlia was still clinging to his arm, screaming at the top of her lungs. The sound echoed off the surrounding trees, carrying for miles through the still night air. Hunter struck her hard across the face, dropping her to the gravel, then came after me with the knife raised. But I was already moving, circling around the front of the vehicle, reaching for my radio. All units, this is Ranger Moraine. Code Red at Quinault Trailhead. Officer needs assistance. Armed suspect on scene." Hunter tackled me before I could say more, driving us both to the ground. The radio skittered away across the gravel. We fought in the dirt and leaves, rolling back and forth, the knife blade passing inches from my throat. He was stronger and more experienced, but I was younger and desperate. The fight ended when my hand found a rock the size of a baseball. I brought it down hard against the side of his head and he went limp. For a moment, the forest was completely silent except for my own ragged breathing and Dahlia's quiet sobbing. Then in the distance I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Sirens. The cavalry was finally coming. Hunter survived the head injury, though he never regained full consciousness before the FBI took him into custody. It turned out his real name was Marcus Webb, former Army Ranger with 3 tours in Afghanistan and a dishonorable discharge for assault on a superior officer. He'd been linked to disappearances in 6 different national parks over the past 4 years. They found Thompson's body exactly where Hunter said it would be, at the bottom of a ravine with injuries consistent with a fall. The FBI also found Hunter's main camp, a sophisticated operation with detailed files on dozens of Park Service employees and visitors. His gallery contained evidence from at least 12 victims. Dahlia recovered fully, though she never returned to wilderness photography. I stayed with the Park Service, but requested a transfer to a different location. Olympic National Park held too many memories of that October night. I learned several things from the experience. First, that all the training in the world can't prepare you for the reality of human evil. Second, that experience matters less than instinct when you're fighting for your life. And third, that the most dangerous predator in any wilderness isn't a bear or a cougar or a rattlesnake. It's another human being. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, hearing that cheerful whistling moving through the trees. And I wonder how many other Marcus Webbs are out there in the wilderness, waiting for the next inexperienced ranger to follow their carefully laid trail into the darkness.